I, 28F, never thought I'd be writing this, but here I am. Last weekend, my sister Vanessa, 32F, got married to her longtime boyfriend Mark, 34M. It was supposed to be a beautiful day, but my ex-boyfriend Tanner, 30M, showed up uninvited and ruined everything. To understand how we got here, I need to go back to the beginning. I met Tanner 4 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue. I had just moved to the city for a new job and didn't know many people. Tanner was charming and funny, and we hit it off immediately. He worked as a graphic designer for a local advertising agency, and I was impressed by his creativity and passion for his work. Our relationship moved quickly. Within a few months, we were spending most of our free time together. Tanner introduced me to his friends and family, and I felt like I had finally found my place in the city. His sister Gemma, 32F, and I became close friends, often going shopping or grabbing coffee together. For the first year, everything seemed perfect. Tanner was attentive and romantic. He'd surprise me with little gifts or plan spontaneous weekend trips. We talked about our future together, even discussing marriage and kids. I thought I had found my soulmate. But as time went on, I started to notice some red flags. Tanner could be possessive and jealous. If I went out with my coworkers after work, he'd bombard me with text messages asking where I was and who I was with. He'd get upset if I spent too much time with my family, saying I was prioritizing them over our relationship. I tried to brush these incidents off, telling myself that Tanner just loved me and wanted to spend time with me. But things started to escalate. He'd have angry outbursts over small things, like me forgetting to buy his favorite snack at the grocery store or being a few minutes late to meet him for dinner. One incident stands out in my memory. About 2 years into our relationship, I got a promotion at work. I was excited and wanted to celebrate, so I invited Tanner to dinner at a nice restaurant. But when I told him the news, his reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of being happy for me, he seemed annoyed. He made snide comments about how I'd probably be too busy for him now and accused me of caring more about my career than our relationship. I was hurt and confused by his reaction. This was a pattern I'd noticed more and more. Any of my successes or achievements seemed to threaten him. It was as if he couldn't be happy for me unless he was doing better than me. Despite these issues, I stayed with Tanner. I loved him, and I kept hoping that things would get better. I made excuses for his behavior, both to myself and to others. When my sister Vanessa expressed concern about how Tanner treated me, I defended him, saying she just didn't understand our relationship. Things came to a head about 8 months ago. We were at a friend's birthday party, and Tanner saw me talking to a male coworker who had also been invited. Even though it was a completely innocent conversation, Tanner completely lost it. He stormed over, grabbed my arm, and started yelling at me in front of everyone, accusing me of flirting and cheating on him. I was mortified and embarrassed. Our friends tried to calm Tanner down, but he was out of control. He knocked over a table, spilling drinks everywhere, and nearly got into a physical fight with my coworker. The party host ended up calling the police, and Tanner was escorted out. That was the final straw for me. The next day, when Tanner came over to apologize, I told him it was over. I couldn't take the jealousy, the anger, and the controlling behavior anymore. He begged me to reconsider, promising he would change, but I stood my ground. I told him I never wanted to see him again. For the first few months after our breakup, Tanner wouldn't leave me alone. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced, sometimes in the middle of the night. He'd call and text constantly, alternating between apologies and angry accusations. He even tried to contact my friends and family to get to me. It got so bad that I had to change my number and move to a new apartment just to get some peace. During this time, I leaned heavily on my sister Vanessa for support. She let me stay with her and Mark for a few weeks while I looked for a new place. She was there for me when I cried, when I doubted my decision, and when I was scared of Tanner's behavior. Vanessa and Mark's support was invaluable, and it brought us closer than ever. Things had been quiet for the past few months, and I thought I was finally free of Tanner. I was wrong. The day of Vanessa's wedding arrived, and everything was going perfectly. The ceremony was beautiful, Vanessa looked stunning in her dress, and Mark couldn't take his eyes off her. At the reception, I was chatting with some of Vanessa's friends, feeling happy and relaxed for the first time in months. That's when I heard a commotion near the entrance. I turned around and there he was, Tanner, stumbling into the reception hall, clearly drunk. My heart started racing. How did he even know about the wedding? How did he find out where it was? Before I could process what was happening, Tanner spotted me and started making his way over, knocking into tables and guests as he went. I froze, not knowing what to do. Vanessa's husband Mark and some of his groomsmen quickly intervened, trying to escort Tanner out. But Tanner wasn't having it. He started yelling, saying he needed to talk to me, that he still loved me, and that I was making a huge mistake by leaving him. The entire reception came to a standstill. Everyone was staring, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. Vanessa looked horrified, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. This was supposed to be her special day, and Tanner was ruining it. It took 4 guys to finally drag Tanner out of the reception hall. He was kicking and screaming the whole way, causing a huge scene. Once he was gone, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Vanessa's new mother-in-law tried to lighten the mood by asking the band to start playing again, but the damage was done. The joyful atmosphere of the wedding had been shattered. I was a mess for the rest of the night. I kept apologizing to Vanessa and Mark, feeling guilty that my ex had ruined their wedding. They were understanding, but I could tell they were upset. Some of the older relatives were whispering and giving me disapproving looks, as if it was somehow my fault that Tanner had shown up. After the reception, I went back to my apartment, feeling drained and humiliated. I thought I had moved on from Tanner, but his appearance at the wedding brought back all the painful memories of our relationship. I couldn't sleep that night, replaying the events in my head and wondering how things had gone so wrong. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages from Tanner. He was apologizing for his behavior, saying he didn't mean to cause a scene, and begging me to give him another chance. I didn't respond to any of them. I thought I had made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with him, but apparently, he still hadn't gotten the message. Now, I'm at a loss for what to do. I'm worried that Tanner might try to contact me again or show up at my workplace. I'm also dealing with the fallout from the wedding incident. Some of my family members think I should get a restraining order, while others are suggesting I talk to Tanner and hear him out. I don't know what the right course of action is. Part of me wants to just ignore everything and hope it all blows over, but another part of me is scared that Tanner might escalate things if I don't address the situation. I'm also worried about the strain this has put on my relationship with Vanessa and her new husband. They say they don't blame me, but I can't help feeling responsible for ruining their special day. Has anyone been in a similar situation? How did you handle it? I could really use some advice on how to move forward from this mess. Update 1: It's been about a month since my last post, and a lot has happened. I want to thank everyone who commented and offered advice. Your support really helped me during this difficult time. After much consideration and discussion with my family, I decided to take legal action against Tanner. The process was more complicated than I expected, but I'm glad I went through with it. First, I had to gather all the evidence of Tanner's harassment. This meant going through months of text messages, voicemails, and emails. It was emotionally draining to relive all of that, but it also reinforced my decision to get a restraining order. I had forgotten just how persistent and manipulative Tanner had been. I also reached out to friends and family who had witnessed Tanner's behavior, asking them to provide statements. My friend Sarah, who was at the birthday party where Tanner had his big blow-up, wrote a detailed account of what happened that night. Vanessa and Mark provided statements about the wedding incident. Even my old neighbor from my previous apartment complex wrote a statement about the times Tanner had shown up uninvited, yelling and causing a disturbance. With all this evidence in hand, I filed for a restraining order. The day of the court hearing was nerve-wracking. I was terrified of seeing Tanner in court, worried about how he might react. But to my surprise, he didn't show up. The judge reviewed all the evidence and granted the restraining order. Tanner is now legally required to stay at least 100 yards away from me, my home, and my workplace. He's also prohibited from contacting me in any way. The restraining order has given me a sense of security that I haven't felt in a long time. I can go to work without constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if Tanner might show up. I can relax in my apartment without fearing a knock on the door. However, getting the restraining order wasn't the end of the drama. A few days after it was served, Tanner's sister Gemma reached out to me. Gemma and I used to be close when Tanner and I were dating. We'd often go shopping together or have girls' nights. But we hadn't spoken since the breakup. I assumed she had taken Tanner's side. Gemma asked if we could meet for coffee, saying she wanted to talk about Tanner. I was hesitant at first, worried that she might try to convince me to give Tanner another chance. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her at a public cafe. When we met, Gemma looked tired and stressed. She started by apologizing for Tanner's behavior at the wedding and for not reaching out sooner. Then she dropped a bombshell. Tanner had been struggling with alcohol addiction for years, something he had managed to hide from me during our relationship. I sat there, stunned, as Gemma explained. Apparently, Tanner had started drinking heavily in college to deal with the stress of his coursework. By the time he graduated and started his job at the advertising agency, he was drinking almost every day. He was functional enough to hide it from his co-workers and from me, often drinking in secret. Gemma said that Tanner's drinking had spiraled out of control after our breakup. He had started showing up to work drunk, missing deadlines, and getting into arguments with his coworkers. He eventually lost his job. He had alienated most of his friends with his erratic behavior, and was now living with their parents. The incident at the wedding had been a wake-up call for Tanner's family. They had known about his drinking problem but had been in denial about how bad it had gotten. Now, they were trying to get Tanner into a rehab program, but he was resistant to the idea. I sat there, trying to process all this information. How had I not noticed Tanner's addiction during our 3 years together? Gemma said Tanner was very good at hiding it, often using breath mints to mask the smell of alcohol and blaming his mood swings on work stress. Part of me felt angry that Tanner had kept this from me for so long. Another part felt guilty for not noticing, for not being able to help him. But mostly, I felt relieved. Relieved that I had gotten out of the relationship when I did, before things got even worse. Gemma asked if I would consider talking to Tanner once he was sober and had completed rehab. She thought it might give both of us some closure. I told her I'd think about it, but I made no promises. Right now, I'm focused on healing and moving forward with my life. As for my relationship with Vanessa and Mark, things are slowly improving. They've been incredibly understanding throughout this whole ordeal. Vanessa and I had a long talk where we both cried and hugged it out. She assured me that she doesn't blame me for what happened at the wedding, and we're working on rebuilding our bond. Mark's family has been a bit more difficult to win over. Some of them still give me cold looks at family gatherings, but Mark has been great about standing up for me and explaining the situation. Last week, we all had dinner together, and it felt like a step in the right direction. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time. I'm focusing on my career. I recently took on a big project at work that's been keeping me busy and challenged. I'm also spending more time with friends who have been incredibly supportive throughout this whole ordeal. I know I have a long way to go, but for the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe again. The restraining order has given me peace of mind, and knowing the full story about Tanner has helped me find some closure. Thank you all again for your support and advice. I'll update again if anything significant happens. Update 2. It's been about 3 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some new developments. First, the good news, the restraining order against Tanner has been working well. He hasn't attempted to contact me or come near my home or workplace. It's been a relief to go about my daily life without constantly looking over my shoulder. Vanessa and Mark returned from their honeymoon, and we've been spending more time together. They've been incredibly supportive, and our relationship is stronger than ever. We even laugh about the wedding incident now, calling it the great explosion of 2023. It feels good to be able to joke about it, even if it still stings a little. Now, for the more complicated part of the update. About a month ago, I received a letter from Tanner. Before you worry, he didn't violate the restraining order. The letter came through his lawyer, which is apparently allowed. In the letter, Tanner apologized for his behavior at the wedding and throughout our relationship. He explained that he had completed a 60-day rehab program and was now 3 months sober. He acknowledged the pain he caused me and said he was working on making amends as part of his recovery process. The letter also included an invitation. Tanner asked if I would be willing to meet with him, in a public place with a mediator present, so he could apologize in person and we could have a conversation about our past. He stressed that he wasn't asking for reconciliation, just an opportunity for closure. I was conflicted about how to respond. On one hand, I appreciated that Tanner was taking steps to better himself and wanted to make amends. On the other hand, I worried that meeting him might undo all the progress I've made in moving on. I spent days mulling over the decision. I talked it over with Vanessa, who was supportive but cautioned me to prioritize my own well-being. I also reached out to my friend Sarah, who had been there for me throughout the breakup. Sarah was more skeptical, worried that Tanner might try to manipulate me into getting back together. After a lot of soul-searching, I decided to agree to the meeting. We set it up at a neutral location, a conference room at my therapist's office, with my therapist present as a mediator. The day of the meeting arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. As I waited in the conference room, I couldn't help but remember all the good times Tanner and I had shared, as well as the painful moments that led to our breakup. When Tanner walked in, I was struck by how different he looked. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, but there was also a clarity in his gaze that I hadn't seen in a long time. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt as he sat down. The meeting was intense. Tanner stuck to his word about not asking for reconciliation. He apologized for his behavior, both during our relationship and after. He took full responsibility for his actions, not blaming the alcohol but acknowledging how his addiction had warped his thinking and behavior. Tanner went into detail about his struggle with alcoholism, explaining how it had started in college and gradually taken over his life. He talked about the shame and fear that had kept him from seeking help earlier, and how he had pushed away everyone who tried to support him. I had the chance to express how his actions had affected me, the fear, the stress, the embarrassment. I told him about the anxiety I still feel sometimes, the way I flinch when I hear a loud voice or see someone who looks like him from a distance. It was cathartic to say these things to his face and have him truly listen. We also talked about the good times we had shared, our first date at the local art museum, the weekend trips we took to the beach, the nights we stayed up late talking about our dreams for the future. It was bittersweet to reminisce about these moments, knowing that they were now firmly in the past. By the end of the meeting, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't magical or earth-shattering, but it was closure. I wished Tanner well in his recovery but made it clear that I had no interest in having him in my life moving. As I left the meeting, I felt proud of myself. Proud for setting boundaries, for standing up for myself, and for being strong enough to face my past head-on. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was an important step in my healing process. In the days following the meeting, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I realized that while Tanner's addiction explained some of his behavior, it didn't excuse it. I felt more confident in my decision to end the relationship and maintain my boundaries. I know this journey isn't over. I'm still working through things in therapy, processing the complex emotions that came up during the meeting with Tanner. I'm also focusing on rebuilding some of the relationships that were strained by this whole ordeal, particularly with some of Mark's family members who were still skeptical of me. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. I'm throwing myself into my work and hobbies, rediscovering parts of myself that I had neglected during my relationship with Tanner. I've even started taking a photography class, something I've always wanted to do but never had the courage to try before. Thank you all for your continued support. Your comments and messages have been a source of strength throughout this process. I'll update again if there are any significant developments. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some final thoughts on this chapter of my life. The meeting with Tanner turned out to be a turning point for me. After facing my fears and standing my ground, I felt a renewed sense of confidence and self-worth. I've continued to focus on personal growth, both in my career and my personal life. At work, I've taken on more responsibilities and even mentored a new employee. My boss has noticed my increased confidence and dedication, and there's talk of a potential promotion in the near future. It feels good to be recognized for my hard work and to know that I'm valued in my professional life. My photography hobby has blossomed into a real passion. I've been taking more advanced classes and even had a few of my photos displayed in a local cafe's art show. It's been incredibly fulfilling to express myself creatively and to see others appreciate my work. Vanessa and Mark are doing great. They recently announced that they're expecting their first child, and I'm thrilled to become an aunt. We've been spending a lot of time together, planning the nursery and discussing baby names. The wedding incident is now just a crazy story we tell at family gatherings, usually accompanied by eye rolls and laughter. As for Tanner, I haven't heard from him directly since our mediated meeting, which is exactly what I wanted. I did run into his sister Gemma at a local coffee shop a few weeks ago. We had a brief, cordial conversation. She told me that Tanner is still sober and has been making positive changes in his life. He's found a new job and is attending regular AA meetings. While I'm glad to hear he's doing better, I'm also relieved that our paths no longer cross. The restraining order expired last month, and I chose not to renew it. Tanner has respected my boundaries since our meeting, and I no longer feel the constant fear and anxiety that plagued me before. It's liberating to walk down the street without constantly looking over my shoulder. My relationships with Mark's family have improved significantly. At a recent family barbecue, his mother pulled me aside to apologize for her initial coldness towards me. She admitted that she had misjudged the situation and me. It was a touching moment, and I feel like I've truly been accepted into their family now. Looking back on this whole experience, I've learned a lot about myself. I've discovered an inner strength I didn't know I had. I've learned the importance of setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. And most importantly, I've learned that it's okay to prioritize my own well-being and happiness. I've also started dating again, cautiously. I met a nice guy named Alex, 31M, at my photography class. We've been on a few dates, and while it's too early to say where it might lead, it feels good to be open to the possibility of a new relationship. I'm taking things slow, making sure to communicate openly and maintain my boundaries. To anyone who might be going through a similar situation, I want you to know that it just gets better. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, but with time, support, and a lot of self-reflection, you can come out stronger on the other side. Thank you all for being part of this journey with me. Your support and advice have been invaluable. While this will be my final update on this situation, I'm leaving this post up in hopes that it might help someone else who finds themselves in a similar position.